Okay, I need to pause on something. That moment where the guy calls her Koyuki and she just freezes? That's not just social awkwardness. That's full system shutdown.
Right? Like her brain couldn't process it. But here's what's bothering me. Was that actually that big a deal? Getting called by your first name?
See, that's exactly the question, though. When Koyuki gets called by her first name for the first time, why does connection feel more threatening than isolation?
So this episode, we're watching Koyuki navigate a world that keeps trying to connect with her. She's got her avoidance tactics down to a science. Swift movements, specific crosswalks to dodge interaction. Then this male peer shows up, starts a conversation, calls her Koyuki instead of Hikawa, and suddenly her whole system short-circuits.
But what caught me was that line. She doesn't get called by her first name much to begin with. The show's telling us this isn't normal peer interaction for her. This is foreign territory.
And by the end, she's literally making herself smaller, physically squishing herself down when the social pressure hits.
Before we dive in, last episode I predicted Koyuki's mirror revelation would catalyze genuine, incremental growth. After watching this, I'm less certain. She's not growing, she's retreating deeper.
Yeah, my prediction about her reverting to emotional walls, this episode basically proved that. One moment of assumed intimacy, and she's right back to isolation mode.
Here's what I think we're examining. Koyuki's journey from practiced emotional distance to panicked vulnerability. But there's something deeper happening with how intimacy gets weaponized against her.
Hold on, though. Weaponized assumes malicious intent. What if this is just normal social interaction that feels threatening because she's forgotten what normal looks like? Let's ground this in what actually happens. First, we see Koyuki's avoidance choreography. She can't get somewhere unless she uses that specific crosswalk. It's not just preference, it's systematic isolation.
Then there's that internal monologue about wanting to know his last name, creating the hurdle to addressing him. She's turning basic social information into obstacles.
But the pivot point is when he casually drops Koyuki in conversation. Watch her face. That's not embarrassment. That's panic.
And it culminates with her physically shrinking, the squish moment, where she's literally making herself smaller to escape the social pressure. I want to start with that micro expression when she processes being called Koyuki. There's this rapid succession: recognition, then panic, then retreat. All in maybe 2 frames.
But that's what I'm questioning. Is that panic justified? Because from his perspective, they're classmates having a normal conversation. First names aren't intimate.
That misses the point, though. For Koyuki, they absolutely are intimate. She's constructed her entire social identity around formal distance. Hikawa keeps people at arm's length. Koyuki assumes familiarity she never granted.
Okay, but hear me out. What if her panic isn't about violation? It's about breaking down. Like she's been so removed from normal interaction that basic peer friendliness feels foreign.
But watch how clinical her observation is. The hurdle to addressing him. She's studying human behavior from the outside, not participating in it.
She's anthropologizing her own social life. That comment about people talking more when saying goodbye? That's observer mode, not participant mode.
But I'd push back on your reading that this is just social rustiness. Watch how she moves through space. Isn't just emotional, it's physical. She's literally reshaping her body to avoid connection.
That squish moment is devastating, but it also proves my point. She's having a trauma response to normal interaction. That's not about boundaries. That's about fear.
Wait, actually, both things can be true. Her boundaries are her trauma response. The first name thing triggered her because it bypassed the protective distance she's spent months constructing.
So you're saying the boundary violation is the social isolation?
More like, her is so extreme that normal becomes threatening. Which is tragic because he's not trying to hurt her.
But let's dig deeper into that clinical observation mode you mentioned. When she's analyzing the hurdle of addressing him, there's something almost scientific about her language. It's like she's documenting social customs from an alien perspective.
Exactly, and that distance isn't accidental, it's protective. By treating social interaction as data to be analyzed rather than experiences to be lived, she maintains emotional safety. But it also keeps her fundamentally alone.
Which explains why the first name moment hits so hard. He's not treating her like a research subject or maintaining that analytical distance. He's just being casual, assuming normalcy she can't access.
And normalcy is the threat. Because if normal social connection is possible, then what justifies all her elaborate avoidance systems? The crosswalk choreography, the careful distance, the clinical observations? Suddenly, they look less like necessary protection and more like self-imposed prison walls.
But here's what's interesting. Watch her body language during that conversation. Even before the first name moment, she's already tense. Her shoulders are raised, her stance is defensive. She's preparing for social combat before any boundary gets crossed.
That's the hypervigilance. She's scanning for threats that might not even exist. But after months of isolation, her threat detection is completely miscalibrated. Friendly interest reads as invasion.
So when he shows genuine curiosity about her thoughts, asks follow-up questions, behaviors that would signal positive social engagement to most people, for Koyuki, they register as increasingly dangerous levels of intimacy.
Right, because intimacy requires reciprocity. And reciprocity means vulnerability. If he's interested in her thoughts, eventually she'll need to have actual thoughts to share, not just clinical observations about social dynamics.
And vulnerability means potential rejection. But here's the paradox. By rejecting connection preemptively, she guarantees the isolation she's trying to protect herself from experiencing.
よくミキとミナトと3人でいたんだよね。
うんうん。塾の後ご飯食べたり喋ったり。
みな、ああ、雨宮くんか。
え、こよみなとも知ってんの？
いや、知ってるというか。
もしかしてまた絡まれた？
また。
かわいそうに。
So the turning point isn't just when he says Koyuki. It's when she realizes he's been assuming a familiarity that she's terrified to acknowledge exists.
But accepting that familiarity forces her to confront whether her walls might not be necessary. And if they're not necessary, then what was all that suffering for?
Look at how much energy she puts into avoidance. If connection is actually possible, then all those detours, all that careful choreography, it was self-inflicted.
That's the real threat. Not intimacy itself, but the possibility that isolation was a choice, not a necessity.
終わったらまたバイトたくさん入れるから帰りバラバラになるけどさ、こようちの店食べにおいでや。え？来たことないでしょ。スマイルサービスするよん。おしゃれバ
あの店一人で行くにはハードルが高いな。1000円超えの。
Okay, predictions. I think Koyuki's going to overcorrect. By episode 4, she's going to attempt some kind of forced socialization, joining a club, or accepting an invitation she'd normally refuse. Because this episode showed her that total avoidance isn't sustainable.
I'm going darker. I think she's going to actively sabotage this budding connection. Push him away deliberately by episode 3. Because that panic response? That's going to make her want to regain control by creating distance on her terms.
But that assumes she learned nothing from the mirror moment last episode.
Or it assumes she learned exactly the wrong lesson, that vulnerability is dangerous. So here's my verdict on our opening question. Connection feels more threatening than isolation because connection requires her to admit isolation was a choice, and that's unbearable.
I'll take it further. This episode proved that Koyuki's real enemy isn't other people's cruelty. It's her own fear of discovering she's been fighting shadows. The question now is whether she'll choose growth or deeper retreat. If you want to see which way this character study lands, hit subscribe, because next week's breakdown is going to determine whether we're watching a recovery story or a tragedy in slow motion.